Los Angeles County is large, and so as one of the largest and most diverse counties in the nation, that means that our reach and our jurisdiction encompasses 88 different cities, Los Angeles City, of course, the largest of them, and more than 10 million people with 81 different school districts and more than 220 languages spoken here, which I'm sure you know. So of the more than 480 or so diverse organizations that we support, they range from theater to dance to media to museums, and many of them have deep cultural ties to our communities. So these are organizations like the Japanese American National Museum, which makes sure we never forget the Japanese internment and the Japanese American experience. The Skirball Cultural Center, which for so many years has not only brought about lenses on Jewish life, but really a universal experience. Cornerstone Theater Company, or the Pan-African Film Festival, East West Players, one of the longest running theaters of color that we have in the nation that puts forward an AAPI lens. These are all examples of organizations that we fund and support. So when our communities or your readers go to their performances or want to know what's happening with these organizations, part of how they exist and operate and provide what collectively across all of the field are 13 million visits or experiences every year here in LA County through the arts nonprofits. That's in part due to support by funders and public sectors like mine. But we have more museums here than many other cities around the country, and theaters as well. So we have more than 200 museums. We have about 279 art galleries. We have more than 500 heritage or historical sites. We have more than 300 theaters, independent theaters. And these are all in addition to the hundreds of live music venues or major concert halls, movie theaters, bookstores, literary arts, and of course our huge county and various city library systems as well. And so within that, we see performing arts organizations, about 226 of them at least. There are a number also of community-based organizations of every kind. So when COVID hit the arts sector quite hard. You might recall that even before there was a stay-at-home order, performances, films, movie theaters, cultural venues had to stop and shut down right away in March. And so what we have seen is that nationally, we track the data from Americans for the Arts and other colleagues, and we know that the impact on arts and culture, the sector nationally, is now reached more than $12 billion impact of lost revenue and unanticipated expenses. We also know nationally there are more than 5 million creative workers in this sector, many of them now out of work. Here in Los Angeles County, based on reports and surveys of the field of arts nonprofits, we've seen collectively more than $20 million of financial impact just on 250 of the arts nonprofits that responded. We've seen 39% have already dipped into financial reserves, 40% have furloughed or laid off staff, and 78% are worried about a decline in philanthropic giving. And we've seen, sadly, a high percentage, about 50%, that say they're worried about even surviving as an organization after COVID. So the support of the field is necessary. Now, I want to share also that even before COVID, because we're talking about the arts nonprofits, vital as they often are undercapitalized. So not a lot of cash on hand, and a lot of the community-based organizations or smaller budget organizations and those that really reflect and serve communities of color and other kinds of culturally rooted practices often don't have the same access to donors or to large amounts of capital. And so that's really a lot of times the focus of our work, where a lot of our grant programs, for example, the majority of the organizations we support are small and mid-sized organizations, including many that serve our historically marginalized communities. So some of the ways we've responded to COVID is that we've put a lot of resources on our website. So definitely lacountyarts.org. We have a digital resource center, digital arts resource center. That includes not only grants that we have, but an assortment of relief grants for individual artists, for nonprofits, and for others in the sector. We also share there some examples of arts organizations that are providing programs and services online. Shifting to virtual formats has been a huge impact of this moment. And so we've seen that. We've seen 70 to 80% of organizations are trying to still serve their communities in these innovative ways, even if they're not getting paid. So supporting that is there. We also have resources of how you can support creativity at home. Our schools, and there's a big digital divide, but our schools and our youth and families have lost those 13 million experiences a year. And so trying to help and provide creativity at home is there as well. So we also accelerated our grant payments to get those out the door, in addition to our regular grant programs and opportunities that we have on our website. Is we were able to make available $10 million from the county's CARES Act relief that we are going to be putting out the door very shortly for the hard-hit arts nonprofit sector. So we announced that a few weeks ago, and now starting, I believe, next week, we will be increasing the communications and releasing the guidelines for the COVID-19 Arts Relief Fund from the CARES Act. So, I think as anyone can attest, not just the arts, but all of you, this is such an unprecedented moment. We know that there are multiple crises. So the COVID health pandemic, but the resulting economic crisis, and really a crisis of confronting systemic inequity, systemic racism, and the need to center those voices and really find new ways to reimagine how we invest in communities and what things like public safety mean. Because this is just a moment where we know there's no going back to how things were before. And in some ways, that's a good thing. I'm a fan of the never waste a crisis. So if we're going to have this moment, what gains can we make? What changes can we make? And so for us, we see the way forward in arts and culture as a few key things that I want to highlight to close. One, when we think about equity, we must also think about what we call cultural equity and inclusion. That is that everybody deserves access to arts and culture, no matter your background, your income, or your geographic location. And all of our artistic and cultural forms should be recognized, valued, and supported. So we can't turn away from the arts. They're not just a nice to have. They're not just for elites. We have lots of studies we can point to that show you that having cultural resources in communities, you actually see better outcomes for that community in education, in health outcomes, and in public safety, and that it supports our well-being. Students who have access to creative outlets in school, they stay in school longer, they're more engaged, right? So all of these things are part of healthy communities. So we need the arts to be part of recovery efforts. And I'll also say that we know that the way forward will be new, and there will probably be more innovations and more blended virtual and in-person ways to experience the arts, but that we've got to continue to addressing equity and ensuring access and looking at the arts as a trusted partner for all of us in our healing, our creativity, and our economic recovery going forward.